Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land I'm speaking from, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. On behalf of the Colour Society of Australia, I'd like to thank you for attending this event, which continues a series of webinars presented free of charge by our New South Wales Division since 2020. We're a 100% volunteer-run, not-for-profit organisation, and we welcome all to our events and membership. If you'd like to support us and gain benefits, including access to our members' collection of recordings of more than 50 previous webinars and conference presentations, our membership year runs from July to June, so right now is a perfect time to join. In any case, please keep an eye out on our website and social media accounts for our events, including our national conference, Colour Matrix Sydney 2025, on October 31st to November 2nd in Sydney. The focus of the conference is for colour experts across a very broad range of specialisations to update anyone interested in colour with news from their fields. We'll have a special webinar next month to give a preview of the conference program and also to talk about how to go about it if you'd like to become more involved in the society. We have a full house of 100 registrants from all around Australia and the world, so we're asking you to stay muted for now, but if you have questions, please submit them in the chat during the presentation and we'll get to as many as possible at the end. This is the 5th webinar initiated by our members in the Canberra Colour Club, including Nick Harkness and Sonia van der Haar. And so I'll hand over to Sonia now to introduce Fiona.
Thank you, David. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Fiona McLachlan. She is a Professor of Architectural Practice at the Edinburgh School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture, where she teaches architectural design and is one of those very rare people teaching colour design to architects and spatial designers. Her work between a kind of practice, research and teaching has enabled her to write 3 wonderfully insightful books and numerous peer-reviewed articles on the subject of colour in architecture. Her work speaks to academic audiences, practicing architects and designers, and the wider public equally well. She has led applied research projects at the Royal Edinburgh Hospital, designing and installing colour interventions in a male dementia ward to assist patients with wayfinding and orientation, the results of which supported the well-being of both patients and staff and carers in wonderful and surprising ways. Fiona was educated at the University of Edinburgh and has been a registered architect since 1983. Her practice, F McLachlan Architects, specialised in social housing and residential projects over a 30-year period and has been included in international exhibitions and publications. Tonight, Fiona will speak about her most recent book, Colour Beyond the Surface, Art in Architecture. I am so looking forward to this conversation. Fiona is one of my personal colour gurus. Her writing has really enriched and expanded my thinking about colour and helped me to better articulate the role of colour in my own architectural projects. So I'm absolutely delighted to have her as a guest of the Colour Society tonight. You, the audience, as David said, are encouraged to write any questions you have in the chat at any time, or if you prefer, you can raise your hand at the end of the presentation, whichever you feel most comfortable with. I will put the titles of Fiona's 3 books in the chat if you want to look those up. And Fiona, welcome. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak. I will hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Sonia. That's a wonderful introduction. And thanks to you for your interest in my work, and to Nick, David, and everyone at the Canberra Colour Club for the invitation to speak tonight. Right, let's try the screen share. Can everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
That's great. It's 13 years, I quite surprised myself. It's 13 years since the first publication of my book, for my first book on colour in architecture. And as Sonia was saying, my interest in colour started with architectural practice and with the interrelationships between practice and research, and recently between research and teaching. In the intervening time, colour has proved to be a rich theme for exploration. Colour is apparently simple, yet complex as a metaphysical experience. It's seemingly unnecessary, yet profoundly effective. In architecture, colour is often neglected or an afterthought. As a product of light, it's constantly shifting in appearance and is wholly contingent on context, including social and cultural meanings and associations. In my experience, the more one works with colour, the more captivating it becomes. My first book, Architectural Colour in the Professional Palette, which was published by Routledge in 2012, briefly discussed collaborations between artists and architects and included a few examples of artists working within architecture, such as this wonderful Kicksbar in Vienna by Oskar Putz from 1986. The distinct differences between artists and architects in the way in which we understand and use colour has remained in my mind, surfacing from time to time, and eventually leading to my recent book, Colour Beyond the Surface, Art in Architecture, which expands on these themes and which will be the focus of the talk tonight. In this collaborative example, Haus Auerbach from 1924, the Bauhaus architects Walter Gropius and Adolf Meyer worked with the wall painter Alfred Arndt. Here, colour is used to both subvert and support architectural form, implying volumes and direction. Architects Herzog and de Meuron have collaborated with a series of artists. Collaboration may embolden architects in their use of colour, such as on the left here, the Laban Dance Centre in London with the artist Michael Craig Martin. Herzog and de Meuron value the critical curiosity that an artist can bring, or simply to act as a sounding board. For example, to debate with Remy Zoig an appropriate scale for a leaf pattern on their Ricola storage building, which is on the right there. As Pierre de Meuron notes, Zoig wasn't primarily out to sell a work of art. He was always trying to understand the essence of things. That's what brought us together. Mutual interests that went beyond our respective fields, moving beyond art in his case, and beyond architecture in ours. My experience of cross-disciplinary research in colour has been highly stimulating and productive. My work with art historians and a colour designer at the Haus der Farbe in Zurich led to a book published in 2015 in both German and English, and to an exhibition, Colour Strategies in Architecture. Reflecting on how our collaboration worked, I keep coming back to this diagram by Graham Sullivan, which he calls the braided relationship. In his diagram, it's about artistic research methods. In the diagram, existing knowledge comes in on the left-hand side as a rope and is unravelled through expansive intersubjective discourse, and then rebraided again as new knowledge emerges on the right. Critically, in artistic research, he argues, the outcome is not known at the outset. In our case, the initial data was over 330 hand-painted samples made from observing colour on a series of built projects. We were interested in developing a way of seeing or a close reading of the architecture through the colour. To us, it was really important to use paint and entirely analogue methods, giving time to think and observe the colour while mixing. More recently, a book chapter in this book on visual research methods in architecture allowed me to reflect on the use of painting as a visual research method. In our case, there were three distinct types of painting. Firstly, a form of index, if you like, the data gathering exercise, removing colour from its original context and equalising it in extent. Building portraits then show the palette, adjacencies and proportions of colours used, and like a human portrait, also suggest a character. Here, this is the portrait for Hans Scherun's reading room in the Berlin Staatsbibliothek. And finally, and most challenging, trying to create a visualization of the colour strategy. This is an abstracted fictive space, an interpretation to communicate what the colour does, rather than, if you like, what the colour is. In this case, this was the visualization for our colour strategy second layer by the Swiss architectural practice Knappertz and Fickert. And in their case, colours used as an illusion, changing the apparent scale of a housing project. As Sonia mentioned, installations which I made together with architecture students as a live project at the Royal Edinburgh Mental Health Hospital in 2017 and 19 became very significant to me. I think of these wall paintings as somewhere between art and architecture. In contemporary architectural practice, time is so squeezed, decisions rarely allow for kind of extended contemplation. Artists, and perhaps painters in particular, have such a direct relationship with the colour, while architects work with colour vicariously. Sometimes we communicate in code or are restricted by colour systems, product specification, and often frustrated by procurement. The artist Patrick Heron, in a lecture in 1974 called The Shape of Colour, noted, "Painting's role in civilization is that of man's laboratory for the disinterested exploration of visual appearances, an exploration carried out uninhibited by any practical demands whatsoever." Not so in architecture. There's rarely time to think in this way. So coming now to the book publication, Colour Beyond the Surface, Art in Architecture, which considers the contribution of embedded artwork to architecture, and with a particular focus on colour and the dynamic relationships between light, form, material surface, space, movement, and collaborative practices between artists and architects around colour. Firstly, I'll do an overview of the structure of the book, and then I'll explore some of the main themes later on. So the introduction asks, what does it mean to cite artwork in architectural settings? And then the book is organised in three parts. Firstly, part one, the architecture. Surface tensions explores dissonance and resonance between form and surface, and the significance of specific citing for artwork. Examples throughout are deliberately eclectic, combining historical and contemporary works. Architects as spatial painters then considers the potential symbiotic relationships between a more private artistic practice and public architectural output through the work of four architects: Carl Friedrich Schinkel and Michael Gottlieb Bindesbo from the 19th century, Le Corbusier and his preference for polychromy, to contemporary architects Bols Wilson, focusing on their work in Korça, Albania. In part two, the focus shifts to the artwork. Pictorial space asks what is added to the architectural space and to our experience of architecture through the pictorial space within and beyond the surface of an artwork. Examples include the murals of antiquity, the role of perspective and illusion, the dynamic colour fields of Yves Klein on the left here, and Mark Rothko and Jackson Pollock, to Sarah Oppenheimer's contemporary installations. In ethereal material, artwork is discussed in relation to its material surface, such as Antoni Malinowski's use of light reflectance through both historical and nano pigments, to the immaterial colour of Olafur Eliasson on the right. How does artwork also take account of durability and vulnerability in architectural settings in terms of its material choices? In the artist's perspective, I draw on interviews with 6 British contemporary artists who use colour as an essential part of their practice and have made artwork for specific architectural settings. The chapter also synthesises the themes of the previous chapters. The artists were selected to allow discussion of very different approaches to making artwork embedded in architecture and also demonstrate a confidence with colour. The final part 3, Constructing the Inseparable, looks at interrelationships between our discrete disciplines that were once inseparable. Collaborative Practices considers how artists and architects collaborate, the role of intermediaries, commissioners, and clients. From Gio Ponti's holistic approach to Bruce MacLean and Will Alsop's speculative adventures in colour. The final essay discusses A House for Essex by Grayson Perry and Fat Architecture, and shows that embedded artwork is subject to very different audiences and values than artwork made in a gallery setting. The book concludes with some reflections on art and architecture, aiming to learn from both perspectives. So now to expand a little on some of these themes. The influence of applied colour in architecture extends well beyond surface decoration. As our viewpoint constantly shifts as our body moves, coloured surfaces become highly significant and can act as beacons or landmarks within the three-dimensional field of view. For example, on the left here, the wonderful Baroque stair at the Würzburg residence, a collaboration between architect Balthasar Neumann and the artist Tiepolo. In some cases, artwork lies at the periphery of our vision, yet heightens the spatial experience, such as these subtle interventions by Blinky Palermo in the middle and contemporary artist Richard Wright. One of the issues architects may have with embedded artwork is a tension between form and surface, such as here, the clashing geometry of Theo van Doesburg's installation at the Café Aubette from 1928, which proved too much for some and it was destroyed, only recently being reinstated as a significant example of the De Stijl movement. By contrast, the contemporary artist Antoni Malinowski, whose work threads right through the book, seeks resonance, responding to the particular situation, form, surface, light conditions, and the movement of people. Unlike many artworks that are planted into space on completion, Antoni's working method is time-consuming and physically challenging. He will often make paintings directly on the ceilings, frequently a neglected surface in contemporary architecture. This is highly unusual in today's construction industry, but more akin to the way in which art and architecture were inseparable in antiquity and during the Baroque period. His large paintings on ceiling surfaces in a series of projects with architects Hayworth Tompkins. For example, this is the Everyman Theatre in Liverpool from 2013. They provide complexity and ambiguity through the layering of pigments. In particular, he plays with light reflectance. The combination of light and specific characteristics of material surface produces colour, which will constantly shift in appearance and engage a human sensory experience. I'm also interested in the knowledge that comes to architects who conduct a parallel, sometimes private, painting practice. For example, Carl Friedrich Schinkel's use of colour at Schloss Charlottenhof and the bathhouse in Potsdam in Berlin from 1826 to 9. Schinkel's paintings, this example on the left here, frequently looked from darkness into light, the deep shade of a portico to the idyllic landscape beyond. And the house uses light and colour in a similar manner. The orientation of the villa and the sun path was clearly used to heighten the effect. For example, the blue tinted light flooding through the glass above the doorway and flooding the entrance hall with this kind of watery effect. Schinkel's travels to the ruins of Pompeii were a formative experience as part of a grand tour and echoed in the nearby bathhouse. The 19th century Danish architect Michael Gottlieb Bindesbo visited Schinkel's buildings in Berlin and also spent time with the sculptor Thorvaldsson in Rome while learning about traditional pigments and making painted studies. The surfaces of his Thorvaldsson Museum in Copenhagen, here from 1844, have since been overpainted with contemporary paint and would have had an even greater depth of visual complexity with the original mineral pigments, such as this wonderful purpley brown, which is caput mortuum and ultramarine. His painterly promenade also is enlivened by the creative use of daylight. Le Corbusier's early collaboration with the artist Amédée Ozenfant in the 1920s established his early principles for the use of polychromy, exploring both tonal values and colour through a series of abstract paintings. In his architecture, colour is often used in an elemental manner, such as here at the La Roche house in Paris. It's interesting to note that his views on colour kept developing throughout his time in practice, and sometimes he contradicted himself. Peter Wilson of the architects, Balls Wilson Architects, he's actually originally Australian, Peter Wilson, but via London at the AA and now in Germany. His early presentation drawings always contained colour. On the left, a drawing made well before computers, and the terracotta colour is actually made by shoe polish applied to the surface of the paper. Often watercolour studies are also used in the development of the architecture, leading to completed buildings that incorporate colour in a very confident manner. Wilson also makes many paintings that are speculative or meditative, often with an embedded narrative. Much of this, he's noted, are conversations firstly with himself, as private reveries. Unlike architecture that will take many years to come to fruition, these are not only representational, but are intellectual wanderings that have a physical material presence. These ideas then surface and inform the architectural work of the practice. For example, in the city of Korça in Albania, which is a concentrated example of this painterly approach. Colour is employed as a form of urban polychromy. In fact, he calls it radical urban polychromy, executed through a series of buildings dispersed around the city. Colour is not an afterthought. It was central to the master plan, which they won in competition, and is used to navigate as well as shifting the identity of the city, reorientating, redressing, and representing the past. This external polychromy is constructed through predominantly monochrome interventions, such as here the blue half house that anchors the corner of a public square. If you're wondering about this, it's because they had to keep the house but demolish half of it, which is why it's called the blue half house. Colour is seen here as a signifier of change as well as a visual marker of place. In the renovation of the mayor's office, colour is truly polychromatic, juxtaposing different colours adjacent to each other. There's a tacit understanding of the role of colour as a spatial modifier, while the choice of hues challenges conventional expectations of authority. Wilson feels strongly that architects should be able to work with colour as part of their skill set. In his case, the iteration of thousands of small paintings appears to have given him a confidence and facility as a colourist that's also evident in the architecture of the practice. In terms of artwork within architecture, I was interested to consider what's added to the architectural space through the pictorial space within and beyond the surface of an artwork. For the artist, a painting made on canvas as a transportable piece of art carries with it a concept of the audience as the object of a fixed gaze, albeit momentarily focused. By contrast, a permanent artwork set within architecture becomes part of the space, heightening our experience or forcing specific readings that may be supportive or subversive to form. Here the artist John Byrne's ceiling at the King's Theatre in Edinburgh. He had to negotiate a curving surface by placing the figures on the flattest section of the dome. It's appropriately playful and theatrical. The properties of any material surface define how colour is experienced. For example, the architect Eileen Gray from the early 20th century developed an extraordinary knowledge of layering lacquer and pigment and varnishes through meticulous experimentation. These complex surfaces absorb and reflect light in a very different way to paint. She then applied this knowledge to her architecture and furniture designs. Architects may shy away from using applied colour and feel more comfortable using materials in their unfinished state. Conceptually, we seem to think of colour of material as differently from painted surfaces. The colour is present, but is often complex, such as the surface of steel seen in close-up on the left. If we can see blues, oranges, yellows, browns, and so on. Or brick, clay, and stone, here reclaimed and packed together to form a new wall in China. The durability of material surfaces is a significant factor in using colour in the environment. In the UK, we're seeing a resurgence in the use of ceramic glazes, often through collaborations, such as this sculptural frieze by the sculptor Richard Deacon and the bold use of colour by the architect Eric Parry in London's Piccadilly. This may not be to everyone's taste, perhaps, but an antidote to much bland corporate architecture, and where the normal response to incorporate artwork is to buy a painting and dump it in the foyer. In terms of the inclusion of contemporary artworks within architecture, I find Mark Pimlott's comment here very useful. For artists to project their work onto architecture as it's made, there must be architects willing to accommodate it. Unsurprisingly, there are relatively few architects who embrace such collaborations, and their potential for disruption. Here on the left, Morag-Marskov's saturated colour installation was welcomed by the architects AHMM in their renovation of an otherwise minimal office interior in London. Jason Bruges creates interactive installations using digitally controlled light that occupy space in a very different way from conventional artwork. Often triggered by sensors, they are programmed to change colour and pattern and engage the viewer very directly. Here, for example, is an installation in Beijing in China in a building by Foster & Partners. In discussions with the selected artists, they all seem to value the opportunity to be involved early in the design process and for the artwork to find a resonance with the space or to enhance the architectural concept. Here are two examples of the work of artist Mark Titchener, who uses both words and colour. I suggest that this is a different form of pictorial space. The colour and the balance of pattern is tuned to a particular tone of voice and also communicates with a cognitive space in the viewer. On the left is an artwork on the corner of council offices in Camden at King's Cross by the architects Bennett's Associates. And on the right, an installation in a hospital research laboratory by Stanton Williams, which is visible from the street with the message, "Together we can do so much." Carlos Raúl Villanueva's work on the campus of the University of Caracas in Venezuela from the 1940s and 1950s is an example of an architect-led collaboration. His training in Paris placed him among the emerging European artists and architects who became lifelong friends. Returning to Caracas, he established a strong position that allowed him to invite a series of artists and sculptors to make work specifically for the campus. The artwork is dispersed, some on the surfaces of buildings, some developed to serve both visual and functional needs, such as the large acoustic clouds here by Alexander Calder in the main auditorium. The artwork also introduces elements of saturated colour in the landscape, making memorable moments to navigate and orientate. Here, art is conceptually and visually integrated through a single-minded vision. It's rare for architects to be acting as patrons and to be able to influence to this extent. The Italian polymath Gio Ponti also used his position and role as editor of Domus, the design journal in the 1950s and 60s, to conceive of a fusion between design and architecture, but in his case with himself as the designer, working in collaboration with craftspeople and manufacturers. Ceramic tile ranges were produced as spin-offs, carpets, furniture and wallpaper. His approach was by way of a total work of art, similar to the Bauhaus concept of Gesamtkunstwerk. Here, a unified design and carefully controlled colour for a hotel in Italy. Commissioning and installing artwork is complex and has led to a rise of intermediaries, for example, Vivian Lovell of Modus Operandi, who continues a lifelong campaign to champion the inclusion of art in architecture. Here, the Mathematical Institute in Oxford by architect Raphael Vanoli from 2015. In this case, she was instrumental in the commission of Antony Malinowski for two wall paintings entitled Spectral Flip that sit opposite each other in the large foyer space. Like his ceiling that I showed you earlier, these are huge paintings and made in situ over a period of 3 months, with Malinowski observing the way the light moves across the surfaces and then developing his paintings in response. Here he used an underpainting of nanopigments overlaid with thousands of tiny brush strokes of traditional pigments that combine to refract and reflect colour around the space. Here, a giant Bruce McLean painting called The Healing Garden was installed in a very prosaic hospital foyer. Although the work was commissioned relatively late in the project, it's now inconceivable to think of the entrance without it. In the best cases, therefore, art and architecture become inseparable. They create resonance through colour and texture to offer a rereading of architectural space and form. The book concludes with a discussion of the project A House for Essex, a collaboration by Grayson Perry, the celebrated ceramic and textile artist, and the architect Charles Holland of FAT, which was commissioned by Alain de Botton. It's hard to define where architecture stops and art begins in this extraordinary narrative project. While a total work of art, as promoted by Gio Ponti, seeks homogeneity, I argue that collaborative practice engages a multiplicity of ways of thinking, with tensions and dissonance that can be productive. By way of a short proscript, I thought I would just show you a few of the things I've been doing since writing the book and my own work. So I continue research and applications wherever possible, and more particularly recently working with architects as to help them with seeking a colour strategy. In this case, I was working with the architects LDN on the renovation of the 200-year-old University of Edinburgh Law Faculty building set in the old college. And it takes up a whole city block. This gave an opportunity to test out the idea of the painterly promenade, which was one of the colour strategies in the book. In this sectional model, which was made by my architecture students, it shows superimposed the idea of an enfilade created by the architects by cutting through every single party wall along the building to make a new teaching floor the whole length of the city block for the first time. Through a series of workshop discussions with the user group, the purpose of the colour was established. The most important thing to them was that it might become an agent to shift the identity of the school. Although rooted in history in this historic setting, the school didn't want to appear stuffy and certainly not corporate. It seems to be very successful and well received. For the last 2 years, I've been working on this amazing project with the architects Collective Architecture for an energy-led retrofit of two they're Category A in Scotland listed brutalist buildings. On the left, the iconic curving form of the block nicknamed the Banana Flats and completed in 1967. And on the right is the block called Links View by the same architects. So adding colour to these buildings could well be controversial. Using the painterly techniques and collage originally developed with my research partners at the Haus der Farbe in Zurich, I've made a series of studies to define a colour strategy which I've called warp and weft. Here, an abstracted diptych study explores how colour may thread along and down the facade in an irregular arrangement, with differing approaches to the north and south of the balcony edges, responding to the light as it changes and moves around over the course of the day. Numerous studies have been developed and the project's just been submitted for planning permission. Here, the full elevations were made by digitally extending my handmade abstracted collages. I should say the colour won't appear as clear as this because this is the balconies are folded out and the soffits exposed to make it more evident. But then testing on a model, you can see that the concrete, which is deemed to be the most significant part of the buildings and the reason for their listing, is still dominant, and the colour will be glimpsed from different directions. I hope to publish an article on this project in due course. To conclude, my fundamental interest, which drives both research and teaching, is to understand the role of colour as an effective tool in the human experience of space. I've made a website, Colour Design for Architecture, which summarises some of my applied colour and research projects. Thank you very much. Maybe stop sharing now, shall I?
Oh, thank you, Fiona. That's just a glimpse into what is a very rich book with so many threads and so many I don't know, things to explore. I mean, for me, I haven't read it cover to cover, but I keep dipping into it and reading chapters and kind of you know, going down various rabbit holes and discovering so much. So for people listening, I really encourage you to look further into the book, because yes, there's so much in there. I wanted to start the questions, and please, if you have any burning questions, you're very welcome to write them in the chat now. In the book, you actually quote Johanni Palasma saying that architecture is the domain of peripheral vision. And you're talking about, well, you then say, you know, there's so much as we navigate architecture that happens and buildings happens automatically or on a semi-conscious level. You know, it all happens, and how much we're aware of or how much attention we pay to specific things can be very limited. But I actually wonder if you agree with that now still, or if you ever did. I think I would have a few years ago, you know, it's one of those statements that it can feel very true, but when you interrogate it, and I've been thinking about in relation to, it's a kind of truth that maybe hides or conceals an ideal body in space that is a perfectly able, well person. And you've worked in hospital spaces and in dementia wards and so forth. So is architecture the domain of peripheral vision for people who may be stressed, hypervigilant, traumatized, lost, or traveling in unfamiliar places, or otherwise incapacitated?
Really interesting. I mean, it's difficult. I suppose we experience space either multiple times or singly. So I suppose it would depend very much on whether it's a transient experience or something that's more prolonged. I think that then helps, I suppose, has an effect on whether how much consciousness you are of it. You know, clearly something where you're experiencing something as a transient space, you may be more attuned, or you may be more aware, and the colour may help you to draw the eye as it would through a painting, you know, actually move through around. So it may be less peripheral, I suppose. If I guess as we become used to space, maybe then things are less conscious, and it might shift slightly more into the background. But yeah, it's fun. One of my students last semester, I teach, and I do this project where they have to derive a palette from a secondary source, and it can be anything. So it's quite nice because the students latch onto something that they enjoy. And there's one student who said, "Well, I really don't, you know, don't know what to do." And I said, "Well, what do you enjoy?" She sort of slightly sheepishly said he liked playing computer games. So I said, "Well, make it about computer games." So he did a fantastic study of how the color in a computer game leads you. So that it's not just about colors, but it's the light. But actually, I was trying to help him to analyze what was actually happening when he was playing the game, how he knew where to go by the use of the color and the light. And he did some beautiful, beautiful graphic studies and became aware that he was making decisions, you know, very quickly. Probably a very good computer game player, but he hadn't really thought about why maybe a terracotta wall on the right was forcing him to put, you know, to go. So there was a sort of peripheral vision happening at a very fast speed in that case. And the colour and light, I do believe, was making a play on that. So I don't know if that answers your question, Sonia, but I suppose I think it very much depends on the time factor.
Yeah, I suppose the second part of that question is, do you feel that the integration of art and considered colour design does a lot more than we realise for people of different abilities in different situations? Like, I think we tend to design for the well and the idealised body, and yet I've come to think myself, the more that we design for everybody and for a broad range of abilities, the more space is enriched for everybody and everybody benefits. It's just that when you have poor spaces that are very bland, monotonous and dull, it does affect everybody, but it's just some people are better equipped to deal with that or to cope or to, you know, they have better support systems. So I'm just interested in shifting this idea that that kind of neutral, bland spaces that are meant to please everybody actually don't do anyone any favors. And
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, the work in the dementia ward, and we did subsequently the main foyer and main corridor, which was 100 meters long.
wow.
That was really important because the dementia ward, I was absolutely profoundly affected by it first time I went in, because every single surface was this very pale yellow, and on the advice essentially that will be the brightest, you know, which is true. I mean, the sort of pale yellow, the highest light reflectance. But what was the dementia ward that I was working in was the most profoundly, I mean, the people who have to be in this full-time care, and we just don't know to what extent they were experiencing the space, but it was not a custom designed space, which was part of the problem. And in particular, the project was really based around discussions with the carers and the partners of the people who were in the hospital, because they were coming in every week to this space to see their loved ones. And they just said it's so depressing, you know, and it was interesting that they just wanted it to be more joyful. It was as simple as that. But also I did write a paper on this called Destinations and Directions, because every space was the same. There was no sense of difference. There was no sense of having got somewhere or, you know, traveled somewhere, because everything felt the same. So that was really interesting, because actually the discussions were predominantly with the nurses and the doctors and the carers and the families in particular. The actual people staying, the residents there, were mostly non-verbal, so it was very difficult. But
you say something about, I think I read that paper, and the staff noticed behavioural changes in the residents because they were getting kind of lost and stuck in places where they couldn't really go anywhere, and it exacerbated their frustrations.
yeah, that was one of the saddest things. And again, I had no experience with this, but somebody just, funny enough, I did a talk, it was an invited talk at the hospital, and I hadn't been there, just on colour. And then someone took me across the road and said, you know, what can you do? And I couldn't walk away. It was too shocking, really. Yeah, what happens was that if someone, they had very, very dark doors. And if someone went to a kind of dead end in the plan, they would literally get stuck and wouldn't be able to turn around, wouldn't be able to get out. So that the staff were always having to go and kind of get people and retrieve them. So it was really just a way of trying to, there was a particular junction, and I had no, it was a complete experiment, and thankfully the nurse, the head nurse, just let me try it, and you know, just to put something that would really quite a strong red wall, which I was actually quite surprised that they encouraged me to make it stronger. We did some tests, and then it did seem to help. Now, whether or not it was just the significance of change, we don't know, but people did not get stuck in that corner anymore, which was really encouraging. And the other thing was that more people were using more spaces, and so there was not so much sort of aggression, because the people were more dispersed, I think, around the wards. Yeah.
Yes. If anyone would like to jump in with their questions, you can very welcome to wave, unmute yourself, do that at any time. We have got a lot of shy people on this call. I did have so many questions. One of my favorite examples in your book is the Thorvaldsen Museum. I've never been there myself. Someone said, oh, hang on, we have a question. Hello, Fiona, wonderful presentation. I was wondering, do you have any comment or opinion to colour applied to architecture by people that did not design or plan or build the architectural spaces? I'm referring to places like Santa Marta Favela at Rio de Janeiro, or Burano in the Venetian Lagoon in Italy, or Gamcheon culture in Busan in South Korea. So,
yeah, fascinating. I haven't thought about this one before. I suppose it's really, you know, this is where I suppose we're used to control. Well, certainly as an architect, one's used to the idea of control and planning, and that meaning that certain things occur and certain things are somehow restricted. And then you come across in the world, obviously, these places where maybe that is just has been less controlled, and therefore there's a kind of snowballing effect of the color, and it is absolutely joyful. I completely agree, and I think they then become places that have identity. And I mean, slightly, one worries slightly that, you know, then they become so sort of fixed with that they then become entrenched, you know, that then rules will gradually apply that you can't not do that. And equally, they become sort of, I suppose, you know, fixed by way of a tourist destination. But I think it's fascinating, and it is. I think the work of Hauster Farber, who I mentioned, I would very much encourage people to follow them, because they're really the first people who I've worked with who really document very, very carefully and sensitively the way colour is used within towns, in their case in cantons in Switzerland. And a lot of that has been self-generated, so it's a historical colour that's generated over a long period. And I was quite skeptical when I first met them, because I thought they were trying to sort of impose a control, but they're very careful to say what they like to do is hold up a mirror to let people really understand what they have, and then kind of understand therefore what should be valued and perhaps what's less appropriate within those environments. So yeah, fascinating. I hope that answers the question to some extent.
yes. Nick, do you want to ask your question, or would you like me to read it out?
Oh, you can read it out.
Okay.
Might be a bit garbled.
Nick's saying that he attended a webinar on Parkinson's disease, and Parkinson's disease can impact peripheral vision due to the loss of visual speed because the muscles in the eye become weaker. So do you think, the question is, do you think that the use of colour may help with Parkinson's disease, could help to improve colour in spaces such as hospitals, offices, and other public spaces? So I'm not exactly sure what the question is. Nick, can you help me?
Yeah, basically, because of the problems with peripheral vision, would colour schemes within public spaces be able to help people with Parkinson's disease?
It's a fascinating question. It's not something I've investigated as yet. There was an AIC conference where there were quite a number of papers on kind of healthcare environments and so on, and I certainly wouldn't pretend to be an expert on that. But I think again, it's interesting that you say about the loss of speed. So that's a kind of cognitive connection, isn't it? That's actually to do with the sort of peripheral vision. So I think it's fascinating to think that I do think colour in whether it's by wayfinding or just simply differentiation in an environment is really important. So I think that's what we're judging, and that's what we're seeing. So again, that sort of stimulation of something which helps draw or helps not only, I guess one of the things is the shape of the space, so that obviously the color, as we know, can define boundaries, can get edges working more clearly, which is very, very helpful for people with limited vision. But cognitive understanding of space then, and that speed of interpretation, I'm sure it would help. I have no experience of it, and it's certainly an interesting question, Nick. Thank you.
We've got a question about any other really good colour resources that you would suggest, in addition to your own books, of course. You mentioned House to Faber. Are there other?
I have an entire bookshelf here of of fabulous books. I mean, there haven't been so many on color in three-dimensional settings, and I think that's part of the the interest in starting the research. There's many excellent books on two-dimensional color. There's Karen Antra's book on color and light, which I think is very useful. I also enjoy some of the 18th century books as well. There's I had a PhD student actually worked on the little book by Patrick Syme. I don't know if people know that, which was one of the first sort of pocket books on colour from 1814, and that was
Werner's.
Werner. Well, yes, it's Patrick Syme's Werner's nomenclature of colour. So it's people think it's by Werner, but it's by Patrick Syme, and he was writing a book based on Werner's original book, and that was taken by Charles Darwin on the Beagle on his journeys. So that's really beautiful, and as I see, it has been republished relatively recently. So that's quite nice because it's about association, and I think I always have students do projects on association, thinking about how we understand colour through something else. One of the projects that sprung from that this year, which was just wonderful, by a student called Douglas Crammond, so shout out to Douglas. He did a project which was based, he's a great baker, he loves to bake things. So he did a project based on the colour of taste. So he got students, he baked things and he got students to taste them and then paint the colours of the different flavours that were coming through. So we had, and then he made colour portraits, like the portraits of the recipes. So we had the colour portrait for artichoke soup or mulligatawny soup, and then gradually that became an interior. So again, you know, books to do with association, that all triggered from looking at something like Patrick Syme's association. If people don't know that book, so that essentially it was the first time they'd say, well, this yellow is the colour of the underside of a butterfly's wing or a particular butterfly, and so on.
Yeah. Because I think am I right in saying that the first sort of colour collection or colour indexes were very much about defining a colour and associating it with a known thing, like, you know, gull's wing or cornfield.
Well, certainly in Syme's case,
kind of lexicon of things in the natural world.
Yeah, certainly that's the premise of the Syme's book. It's excuse me, animal, mineral, vegetable sort of thing. But you do get these ones even earlier. There's I'm not an historian, but you know, there's one from 1600, Boogert's, which is just hand painted, you know, endless different shades. Absolutely beautiful book. But yeah, sorry, I think there's another.
Yes, I have another question, a bit of a different take. So this is an architect, Damien, who's saying he's been fascinated by your second layer colour strategy in the book. Is this a solution to architectural fails or failures, or is this a good way to think about architectural projects from inception?
Thanks, Damien. I hadn't thought of it that way. Actually, architecture. In the case of the Knapperts and Fickert, this is new build, so they're conceiving of the colour as part of the construction and from the early stages. So they're I have to say the second layer is our view applied to their work. So whether or not they would necessarily apply that to themselves, but we were looking at what is the colour doing within the work, and it seemed to be two things. One was quite a volumetric division, so actually almost Corbusian and elemental, but also in an illusory manner, so that you might do the Corbusian ones might kind of look at an elemental, which is about clarifying or actually, you know, really identifying things, whereas Knapperts and Fickert were more disguising or playing with the illusion of volume as well. So it might be a solution to architectural fails. There's plenty of them around. However, I'm very, very wary of colour on poor architecture. And I very often begin lectures by saying that colour will not make poor architecture good. It just won't. In fact, in many cases, it makes it worse if you have colour applied to poor architecture. So I would be probably a little bit wary unless the colour is really well considered and does do something to kind of make a rereading. So it might. I mean, some of the work that I showed from Korcha in Albania, there the budgets were so phenomenally low, and people originally the I don't know if you know the story of the Albanian colour so Eddie Rama, the mayor, who was a painter himself, they were coming out of post-socialism and everything was really very grey, and so they very cheaply did this idea of painting in Tirana, painting the tower blocks, and I believe that the quality of the paint was really quite cheap, so I don't think they've lasted particularly long, but it certainly just shifted the entire mood and of the city very quickly. So that wasn't so much maybe architectural fails, but more urban design monotony, perhaps where the colour was used really to shift identity, but also just to cheer up projects that were very
you mentioned just like colour as a signifier of change is a kind of a powerful thing as an action, doesn't necessarily even have to be beautiful or well resolved, but it can still have quite a powerful effect just in that signifying a change.
Yeah, I think so. I think I suppose we have to be careful with that though, because well, we don't want to think of colour as being, you know, cheap, quick solutions always, you know, it needs to me to be more embedded, you know, to be more conceived of as being something as a resonant thing. But we're also conscious that people think of colour as easily changed, and so that's good and bad, I guess. But you know, for example, the project I showed at the very end there, the reaction of the residents to the colour seems to be very favourable, because particularly the banana flats was in the film Trainspotting. I don't know if it kind of unfortunately has received this real reputation, which for the people living in it, of course, is very unfair. But they're very keen to see something where there is an expression of their lives, you know, and that's what we're hoping the colour will shift the identity, because it has been developed this notorious reputation, which is quite unfortunate, really. Yeah.
Yes. We have one final question. I think we probably need to wrap up.
Yeah.
From Lynn. She's interested if you have worked with photography printed or imagery printed on metals for outdoor buildings, as you know, in art projects embedded in structure. So I guess printed artworks as kind of integrated components on buildings. Lynn, do you mean in personal work or included in one of the publications? If you want to unmute yourself, you can ask that. Yes, have you worked with your work, Fiona, your architectural work?
No, I haven't. I mean, obviously, these things are really.
Is that unmute? Sorry.
Yes, hello, Lynn.
Did I unmute myself?
Yep.
Oh, thank you. Fiona, I'm loving this topic because when you integrate artwork, as with mosaics, I believe they've been integrated for years and years. But with my own work, I was trying to get reflective patterns and from water and things in the sky, and not being able to get a mirror image. And so there is a place we can print on aluminium in Melbourne. And
Yeah.
I've been able to get the different sort of satin things and glassy images I wanted. But I was thinking it would be really good to get that sort of, and it is impregnated into the metal through luxation or some method. But the size, you can get quite big sizes, and they said you can use it as signage. And it can be for quite a long time, and it goes into the metal, and it's supposed to be quite stable. But I wondered if it's a suitable thing to present to an architect if I wanted to do it as and I wondered if you have any experience with it being presented, and any experience and it's recycled as well, so it has a lot of factors. So I wonder what you've got in your history.
Lynn, I mean, I'm also conscious now with the 3D printing and in particular 3D etching. You know, even the students are playing around with etching onto metal, and which is really fantastic, because you can get so much reflection and refraction. You know, especially if you go slightly into the surface. You know, that it's actually then very permanent. And on the photography, there's a really nice project actually by Herzog and de Meuron, who I mentioned earlier, the one had the leaf pattern on their.
Yes.
So they've used etching, I think, on a library project, which was photographs by Thomas Ruf, is a famous German photographer, and they went through sort of catalogue of Ruf's photographs, and
yes,
then these were etched into concrete in this case. And it's called the Eberswald Library, Ebers.
EVERS, yeah.
WALDE, I think, Eberswald. And what happens there is it's the photographs are printed into or etched into the concrete, and apparently when it's rainy, the images begin to appear more, which is quite beautiful. So I think there's so many different techniques developing with laser cutting, with laser etching, and with laser cutting. So we're seeing a lot more work with pattern in architecture. I think there was a long time where surface was just not discussed really. Certainly in architecture schools, it was all form and plan and very, very infrequently surface discussions. But now with some of these processes being developed, pattern, photography, all of these things can be applied to surface. So yeah, I think it's
I'm a little over the rust and the patina look you see in our suburbs, and I think we need to, and just because we're going up in our levels in Melbourne, and the squeeze on our needing more people in more spaces, I think we could bring people over if we had more colour involved or shadowing, because it changes with light. If on these surfaces that I was thinking of printing on, I think we could get people over the line if we made it more attractive for people, and it does change in light with those surfaces. But thank you so much.
Thank you,
I appreciate it.
Did you have a question, Pamela? Okay, thank you. You're on mute. Can I unmute you? Yeah, we can't. Hang on, I don't know that I can unmute you. You have to unmute yourself, which you can do on the bottom left of your screen. No, I'm sorry, we can't. We can't. If you want to write in the chat, I think it's just applauding. Thank you very much. Any final? Hi, Damien. Thanks for your question.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fiona. That was a very rich, wonderful conversation. In case you haven't seen, I've put a lot of the references that Fiona mentioned in the chat there, if you want to Google, follow up with anything. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thanks again, and to everyone. And I hope, I hope it's inspired or sort of just have a go. And I suppose one of my main things is to understand colour in a more nuanced way. So that hopefully will help. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Yeah. Pleasure to have you. Thank you, Nick. Will a recording be made available? I believe so, yes. In a week or two, it'll be up on the Colour Society website.
Oh, I think we can do better than that, probably in a day or two, I think.
A day or two, well, with modern technology.
And that's just for a limited period, is it?
We'll leave it up for 3 weeks or so for anyone, and then after that you can, if you become members, can see it in our collection.
Okay,
Right.
thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much.
Lovely to meet everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.